Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. This is our Twitch recap episode from last Sunday's live show, where we are starting to work on a new project while I take some time to think about our biggest, ugliest Artemis project and see what can't be accomplished from it. Anyway, this is a Jupiter Atmospheric Science Explorer Return mission, JASPER 1, this prototype, and the mission objectives are simple. Fly out to Jupiter, test the viability of Aero capture into Jupiter's orbit, and test the viability of returning scientific samples from Jupiter's atmosphere to the Earth. So, we have to first fly out to Jupiter, try to Aero capture using Jupiter's atmosphere and a heat shield into Jupiter orbit. Remain there for whatever length of time, and that is also, I guess, part of the missions to determine how long the windows are for Jupiter return back to Earth, and test the viability of Earth capture and deorbit on the back of a heat shield only from a Jupiter return mission. So we have started to plot this out. The very first part, the very little guy up at the top, that is what we plan on returning to Earth, because we can transfer the scientific data from experiments into that probe core, and we get full credit as if we were returning them, the experiments in mass. And the part below it is the ejection stage, and we are trying to size a heat shield to the side of it because I was trying to be original or unique, I guess. It was a neat idea I thought of for hopefully being able to get better balance towards the bottom of the heat shield, or rather keeping our center of mass as close to the heat shield as possible, so that we could lower the chance of the spacecraft flipping out and spinning itself sideways and doing all kinds of other wonky things. Now, at the beginning of the live stream, I did actually take the very little top part, the return portion, out to a simulation, that's the word I'm looking for, in low Earth orbit to see what ejection, or really how much delta V we're looking at for a low orbit capture into Jupiter, and how much from there we would need to eject from Jupiter and return to the Earth. And the loose figure I got was somewhere between 7.5 and 8 kilometers per second of delta V to escape Jupiter's gravity and hopefully get us all the way back to Earth. Now, these are just loose figures. There's been no actual simulations run as far as what that actually looks like, but those are the working numbers we're dealing with right now, and I think it's good enough for us to try to prototype out anything. So in our current configuration, which is lacking a whole lot of things, we're looking at about 7.5 kilometers per second of delta V on the back of that AJ10 118K. That is our main engine. Now, of course, we do have a whole lot of things to add, namely comms and power, and then science experiments. Most notably, we're not going to go through all of this without being able to collect at least a little bit of science on the way. There was a lot of problem solving, or rather problems wedging everything we wanted into a rather compact enough space, and still getting all of the experiments we wanted to take with us, as well as all the other things. Like, if we were just to launch this as it stands right now, the mission probably could go, well, fairly well. I guess we'll get to how well the mission will go a whole lot later. But the integration of all of the various science experiments, the film canister was a big one, because I think if we can return pictures of while flying at Jupiter, it will net us a fairly large number of sciencey points. It had better be a couple hundred. If it's not, I'm going to be so incredibly mad that I guess we'll see what that looks like when we get there. But yeah, trying to integrate all of our various sciencey bits and get them all balanced out proved to be quite challenging. Initially, I just kind of placed things on here at random. We do have RCS Build Aid pulled up with its It's telling us basically how much torque we get from our mass being uneven while the engines are firing, and the goal of this game is to get rid of the little red circle, and then you know that you are balanced. We are looking at a not unsubstantial imbalance currently. We're doing it like this because we'll jettison the big heat shield after we have achieved Jupiter orbit, and then our ejection burn basically is going to be the big one that costs all the things, and the film canister is extra awkward to try to integrate. It is just not fun, to say the very least, trying to wedge that big heavy thing onto what we're trying to keep as compact as possible, because it is does have to fit behind a heat shield, and really heat shield is the most thing that has the most mass per cubic centimeter, square centimeter surface area kind of thing. So keeping a compact package is relatively important to us, although we may end up going bigger at some point. And of course, we could just offset the whole of everything, but as fuel drains, that's going to offset even more. So that turns out not to be a viable option, nor is trying to get this whole thing centered again, and then the node disappears. Of course it did, because KSP. There we go. We've finally gotten things reattached again, and I think we can go back to how things were before as we fumble around with RCS build aid for no real reason whatsoever, and essentially trying to figure out a good plan of approach for getting all these science experiments on. So we'll just try to bury the film canister within the Agena core. It's not the greatest option, but I think it's so far the best one we've come up with. And from then we'll pretend that the orbital lens camera thing is the output, and the film canister is just the developing lab that will process the film in space, because that's actually not an unheard of thing. They did have way back in the very early days of spy cameras, they were actually film cameras, and it was all just one big machine that would take the pictures, run it through the development process, and then develop the negatives, and then return them to the Earth, where there would be intercepted mid-fall by an airplane with a giant hook catching the parachute before the film hit the water that would inevitably ruin it. And of course, I can't think of the name of the project right now because reasons. Anyway, back to what we were doing, which was switching minor science experiments to the other side, because our basically our torque number there that you see from the RCS build aid window, we want that to be as close to 0 as possible, but with 0.35 or so kilonewtons of offset. We're going to try to move a bunch of things around. And with the relocation of this film canister, we get it down to .034, which is not terrible, considering that we know we have to have the decoupler and then the heat shield, which may give us a break on how much that torque figure comes out to. And at this point, we can just try to stretch some instruments, clip them in and out by just a little bit, add some comms, and see if we can't get that down. And .007, which is really not bad. I think with good RCS thrust port placement, we should be able to dial that in and keep that very manageable. Now, there was some talk on what to do with the RTGs. We do have access to a new set of RTGs that come on an extendable arm. We'll unlock those for about 10 grand. They are much more powerful. However, I was not considering them or the arm or how big they were when I started doing this build. So unfortunately, I just don't think we can actually find a spot for them, although putting the RTGs on arms would be really cool. And I do like this part a whole lot. I just think there's no good place for it on this mission as it is built currently, and they're tweak scalable, which I don't know if that affects their output or just their longevity, but that is absolutely something we're going to have to experiment with in the future. But for the time being, we're just going to stick with our old tried and true multi-100-watt RTGs. 4 of them should be more than enough to suffice for the main body of the craft, considering I think we're going to have an additional core or so to keep this whole project running long into the Jupiter SOI and things of that nature. We do also have one on the return portion to keep it nice and powered up on its trip back to Earth. What we do not have on the return portion is super long-range comms. You'll notice it's got a dish that's rated for about Mars or so. So hopefully our ejection from Jupiter will be clean and on point. Stop laughing. And we can make any corrections once we are in range of that communications array. Now, with all the sciencey bits added, our delta V did drop below acceptable threshold, so we will add another tank out here to our Brave Pancake and size up a few of the other tanks to get things in line. We're now at 6,800 meters per second, and I do believe that is before the primary heat shield is ejected, although we'll test for that later. And what we do need to figure out currently is RCS placement. We're not too concerned with balance with the heat shield attached. We're hoping that we can get a solid flight onto Jupiter on the back of our transfer stage, which for the tonnage of this thing was a little over 16, 17 tons. We're probably looking at DN2 territory, which is exceptionally cheap. I mean, not the cheapest, but it's been a really long time since we used a medium-duty launcher in this space program. I think everything in the past few months has gone up on a DN5 or a DN6. Yeah, 17-point-something tons currently, which is absolutely for Jupiter transfer is in the DN2 territory, but only by the slimmest of margins. And man, it would be nice to save that 70 or 80,000 Kerbucks price difference between the DN2 and the DN5. So very briefly, we're going to run a disintegration simulation, and I left that clip in because I don't know why that film canister appeared ever so well. It took about a minute or so during the live stream for that thing to go away. But we will get out here to the launch pad and very, very briefly just make sure everything detaches in the way that it should. So the heat shield and then RCS thruster ports, will give those a quick test to make sure everything goes well. And yeah, we need to flip that decoupler around. That's why we painted it something that had a directional paint scheme on it. Engine fires well. It has enough pressure to run itself-ish. All the RCS ports fire and are hopefully will be enough to keep attitude control. And that's it for this test. So we'll get ourselves back into the VAB and do a few more bits of integration before we do a orbital speed entry test, which of course, if it won't pass at orbital speed, it surely won't pass at aero capture speeds at Jupiter, which is the, I don't know. If it won't pass that test, there's no point in continuing with this design. We do need to set up our action groups, first one being radio in. That's our go-to name for science experimenty things. So we'll get all of those added to the list, making sure not to forget anything and making sure we can analyze our telemetries and get all of the extra good goodies that we need from inside of Jupiter's atmosphere, which only one craft has ever touched before. It was a previous Jupiter atmospheric explorer, although the drop pods that went into the atmosphere were unable to remain in contact, and so their data was lost, and eventually they deorbited well after their batteries had died. So it's time for our orbital drop test, so I will turn you over to Old Me live during the show. Fantastic. How the hell are we going to deorbit this stupid fucking thing? RCS to armed, SAS armed. Let's run boot. I'll say yeah, you have to click over here to make it do stuff. Nope. Okay, we did stuff. Fully fueled all-up test. Oh, I should have action grouped control from here. Is that even a thing? Control from here. Nope. Dang it. Really? I'm going to have to wiggle in there and click on stuff. I don't think that was in the game at this point. Ah. That bummer. Oh, I'm going to have to disable crossfeed on this thing. And lock these fuels because I don't want those thrusters firing. Thank you. Okay, well, at least the thrusters are having some effect on... Oh man, but we are probably not very well balanced on this axis. So this test will show us if we, how badly we deflect against retrograde under heavy G loading. I mean, maybe heavy G loading. It's probably going to take the length of the simulation to deorbit. So let's tell computer to hold retro, and let's use physics warp. Yay, physics warp. NASA's messenger orbit insertion was 860 meters per second. Wow. They'll end up with almost 1,200 with the same amount of gravity assists. Yeah, apparently NASA's really good at their job. I should have put a retro solid and attach it to the heat shield so we could deorbit this thing a whole lot faster. But now that I've already spent the money to buy the simulation, I feel like it's a waste of money if I don't just sit here and hold the RCS thrusters. In my defense, I am not a JPL Astrodynamics team. I think that's a valid defense, and a very worthwhile excuse, sir. Should we have painted this first? Are we going to run with the it needs to earn its paint job? It's just, man, the toilet paper texture. We're just deorbiting 16 tons of Charmin. I mean, eventually. It's going to take us a little while to get there. We're going to run through all of our fuel doing this. At least we got that going for us. We're just going to try that. Probably. I don't know how well my mic is picking up background noise, but it's time for her to be eating dinner, so it's probably objecting to being strapped into her ejection seat. Saw that one coming. That is a lot of torque. I mean, that's a lot of torque. The gimbal clipping through the canister. That... Did we kill it? Infinite ignitions, everyone. guys. I'm not sorry. Fixed camera, please. By fixed, you mean locked? I was looking at the nav ball, so I don't even know. Yeah, I mean, if this is really the view you want. We can do that. Locked camera, please. If you insist. This is making me a little dizzy. Now I don't know which way I'm facing. Alright, well, we're coming in at 58 kilometers. That should be a nice, gentle reentry test. I was hoping to get a little lower, so we'll probably light this up once or twice more. Alright. Okay, I can't do that. Let's get out of time warp and then face into retrograde, and we'll just ride this thing on in and see what happens. And I forgot to set up the parachute. We'll do the parachute manually, because yeah, we're gonna eject the thing and then that, and then we don't need to do that. So in order to face into retrograde, we should probably control from here. Face opposite where we are. We really could use a bit more. I don't know. I guess we have enough control authority. We're going to have lots of time to get angled in at Jupiter. Atacore talking to me. I observed a spinny boy. There was a spinny boy. Alright, and we are here. Let's ride it on in. 30 some odd minutes until a thunk. Let's get angled in, then we'll tell computer to hold retro. Retrograde, there you go. And just let it dispense with all the fuels. Why not? Why is Spinny Boy? Because I was using the main engine to deorbit, because doing it, any engine burn with the heat shield attached is massively off balance. Because I figured we wouldn't be doing any actual burn with the heat shield attached. We'd get our correction sorted out on whatever upper stage propels us. At this point, it's probably going to be a very early B upper stage from a DN2. Because this thing comes in at 16 tons. I mean, that's... So I think the RA9 could put, like, 5 tons to Jupiter, maybe? The DN2, I think we can definitely lob this at Jupiter. We'll take a look when we get back into things, but we need to up and deorbit, yo. So we're just going to let this ride, and I'm wondering if we should go with RCS off, just see what happens. Let Newton take over. Nope, we should not let Newton take over. I didn't think this was going to be the... Oh, I guess that's the lighter side, which is why it's tipping out, so maybe we should roll. So that our Proby Boy side faces down. There we go. No, what are you doing? Come on now. Quit trying to anti-roll. Ooh, okay. Bad physics warp. Bad physics. Why? No, why? Why do you... Oh, that's a mission fail. Also very interesting. The heat shield is by far the heaviest doohickey on the thingy. Oh, I can put an RA-9 to Jupiter. Fair. This camera angle is really screwing with me. That's very interesting. Yep. I wonder what the tonnage on this thing is. Let's say, what broke off that didn't already explode? Okay, well. Why do you insist on this camera angle? Yeah, if this was happening live during an actual Jupiter capture, the whole thing would have disintegrated by now. This camera angle is messing with me. We're not doing locked anymore. I'm very sorry. It's making me a little motion sick. The fact that it still hasn't leveled out, despite that the heat shield is now obviously the heaviest part. Or maybe we should just enclose the whole dumb thing in a fairing. Interstellar camera angle hype. I guess we're our rotation is enough to keep everything from exploding already. Dang it. I was really hoping that thing could get turned around on its own, but yes. Even the heat shield exploded. Revert VAB. Yeah, we are back now in the VAB, and this is actually some post-edit footage. This was not part of the live stream. We did kind of poke at a few other things, but this idea has been kind of bothering me for the last couple of days, so I decided to just jump into the VAB and see what we couldn't build out. So we're starting with the same return stage as before. We're just basically scrapping the old design because it obviously did not work. So starting from the ground up, we're going to go for a much more linear build this time. Hopefully it'll be a whole lot simpler and a lot easier to manage. So we've got our Voyager comms, we've got our film return, which are the two things that are kind of offsetting our mass by the most amount currently, and we will build out the basic structure that I kind of sketched out at work, which includes 2 fuel tanks. Will hopefully carry all of the aerosine and nitrogen tetroxide we need to feed that HA-10 118K, and then a big heat shield up at the top, because going with a tried and true method of putting things in linear order seems to work pretty well for us. So hopefully those 2 fuel tanks being raised up like that will be enough to help keep weight balance for the spacecraft in the time that it is capturing into Jupiter's orbit, and stay well balanced enough. Although, of course, we do have to do a little bit of shuffling and a little bit of balancing out our sciencey experiments. Of course, that is the most difficult part of this build, which is finding places to wedge all the things and cram them into little nooks and crannies while trying to keep that torque figure at something that will be very easily manageable by RCS. If at all, I would, I'd like to see even lower than .007, which was our current working figure, and happily we do get way below that while still integrating all of our coolest sciencey bits. Now I am also including 2 smaller drop probes on this mission, so that we will capture into Jupiter's orbit, and then we will have 2 more drop probes that we can jettison for deorbit into Jupiter's atmosphere and maybe get some science from lower down before they are crushed into oblivion by the immense pressures of the gas giant. Those will be included on the decouplers just under the fuel tanks, but we're going to get to those later. I'm going to actually have to build those in a separate VAB and import them as a subassembly just to make sure that we're not going over our avionics limit for everything. Speaking of avionics, we are way over budget as far as what this tiny little Agena core and our return core can handle. So we've actually had to include another 1 meter core because it's only like 0.1 tons, but we'll manage up to 150. Whereas everything else that has much more reasonable tonnages is masses more than that, ironically enough. Anyway, this is a very brief disintegration test to make sure that all of our decouplers are facing the correct direction. They are. So with that test concluded, and with all the RCS ports testing well and our radio in testing well, it is time to go outside and do an orbital drop test. Exciting part. So we'll simulate ourselves out to a nice low Earth orbit at an altitude of about 250 kilometers, and the weight balance with the engine running is actually pretty good. Should we have to make a correction on the way to Jupiter, it will absolutely ruin our chances of being able to get back. So we've made a burn to deorbit, setting our periapsis down to about 62 kilometers. We have faced ourselves prograde into the atmosphere and just started to coast. I did leave SAS and RCS on because I wanted to see how much effort it would take for them to keep us facing in, and it looks like somewhere between 50% pitch, based on what I'm not entirely sure, because the weight balance was pretty spot on. But the good news is it survived without any actual incident. I did try to do a mid-air disintegration test, and it did not work. The heat shield came back and blew stuff up. So we're going to add some struts, and we're going to call this design workable. We are going to add some ridiculous thruster ports down here so that if it does have trouble maintaining pitch or yaw, it can have the authority to do something about it, and move on to the drop pods. Now, 2 short-range comms. These should maintain communication even while not deployed. We only really do need short-range comms and a nice assortment of sciencey bits. We are still under our tonnage, so we'll include a little fuel tank for those RCS ports. They are really designed to maintain pitch while traveling through the atmosphere, although it would be nice if they could deorbit the craft so we don't have to do that on the main engine. So I'm relatively satisfied with this design. We will save it as a subassembly and then load JASPER 3 back up here into the VAB and integrate the new drop pods onto it. We're still looking at 7,155 meters per second on the main stage, and we should have about 500 to 600 That's a really conservative estimate on our return stage, which puts us almost within threshold. So I will do a little tweaking to the fuel tanks a little later on and try to get that closer to about the 7,400 meter per second, and also add some thrusters to the very bottom of the return stage so that we can more directly apply that energy as needed should we need to return this return portion of this mission to Earth. Now, I will stipulate that is a very secondary objective. Primarily, I want to see if we can get some data from inside Jupiter's atmosphere and radio it back in. But it's time for us to do a quick launch test. This is significantly heavier, 22, maybe 25 tons. Yeah, so it's heavier than our previous variant, so I'm not sure the DN2 is still a viable launch option for this, but I didn't want to let it go without at least testing it first, considering we do have some upgrades for the DN2 platform that we have not yet integrated, namely the RD-172 engines for the boosters, and the HG3A for the upper stage, which is primarily the same, it just has more ignitions. So launch clamps are off and we are skyward bound with a very respectable thrust to weight ratio. We'll lean very quickly into our gravity turn before trying to get ourselves into a decent orbit. And boosters clear off and away. Man, launches are really hard to narrate when they're sped up so heavily. Fairings are off and we are on the core stage, just now topping more than 1 TWR, and really with 6,600 meters per second total DV in the upper stage, we really kind of had to put it in orbit all on its own. So we're going to slate this for a DN5. That's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really appreciate it, and I'll see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.